Calm down before you stress up the groove. The energy a little different when the blessings accrue. Hey, who you talking to? Just know I ain't no regular fool. Could be anything in the world, but I can never be you because I stand tall like I'm on my tiptoes, baby. You think a little too small. I got big goals, baby. Hey, where the money at? Look, I just need the info. Pronto, I go and get it and split it with my kinfolk daily, and I'm the type of that might change my number on you. Yeah, that's how you react when people took a slumber on you. Pretty brown skin, baby, I can see the summer on you. You see all the bread, and I know it make you wonder, don't you? Ooh, I ain't surprised at all. Seen them rise and fall. Went up the mountain, it wasn't hard to climb at all. At the top, I found some relief. I finally got some peace. Carry on, but please don't mess up the mood. Yeah, I worked too hard for it. No, I need it, beat it, before you mess up the mood. Yeah, ooh, I worked too hard for it, and I need it, so please don't mess up the mood. Don't mess up the mood. Don't mess up the mood. Yeah, I worked too hard for it. Yeah, don't mess up the mood. Oh, it's so crucial, I gotta keep it. It's in the ass everywhere. No, it's not a secret, and I bet they didn't think that I'd ever get it. Everything you've done, I get it. The life you're dreaming, I live it, and I'm coming in high. You better get out the kitchen. Yeah, I could make a hit on whatever you pitching. Baby, let me fill up whatever you missing. Or you like it up at the top, it's a better view, isn't it? I'm not surprised at all. No, it ain't what you need. Come on, just pay the fee. I supply it all.
By design, Daniel, you're not supposed to hear me.
Hard to climb at all. At the top, I found some relief. You see, so please don't mess up the mood. Yeah, I worked too hard for it. No, I need it, beat it, before you mess up the mood. Alright. Ooh, I worked too hard for it, and I need it, so please don't mess up the mood. Don't mess up the mood. Don't mess up the mood. Yeah, oh come on, I worked too hard for it. Yeah, don't mess up the mood.
After 28 years of a committed allegiance to the world of evangelical doctrine,
What happened?
In 2010, I said, see ya.
You did.
It's not me, it's you.
Oh, no.
Specifically, your anti-LGBTQ theology,
Yeah.
rooted in tragic and toxic misunderstandings of the Bible.
That'll happen.
And now, I'm ready to take UnClobber to the next level.
I'm excited.
Introducing UnClobber online courses.
Ooh, sounds good.
These in-depth courses are designed to show you, once and for all, that any attempt to use the Bible as justification for anti-LGBTQ beliefs
Wait for
is, in a word, wrong. So head on over to
my favorite part.
unclobber.com today and check out the all-new UnClobber online courses.
Mm-hmm.
And let's keep moving toward a world in which the Bible is no longer
Last day to use the promo code PRIDE21.
and the judgment. for
Save
lesbian,
21%.
Or gay, or bisexual, or transgender, and our queer siblings. Amen.
3, 2, 1. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Perspective Shift with me, your host, Colby Martin. I don't feel like I give enough love to my middle name, Brenneman. Maybe, I think I need a PhD before I can start using my middle name. Anyway, so I'm just regular old Colby here, San Diego, California, 2 p.m. Pacific, getting excited for what's gonna come up later in the show. I'm gonna dare say my friend Julie Rodgers. We don't know each other, but I'm gonna predict friend, and then she can let me know later. That's a little premature, which is fine. So for now, my friend in waiting, Julie Rodgers, is going to join the show. And her new book, y'all, I can't stand how much I'm digging this. It's called Outlove. It's also just a really pretty book. I don't know if you can see this. It's got this gorgeous matte black finish with all these sort of chalk writings of things that aren't as lovely. And then this sort of raised, it's just a gorgeous book. So there's a link for that in the description below, whether you're on the Facebooks or the YouTube. You got to get your own copy. Anyway, I'm really glad you're here with us at Perspective Shift. Welcome to the show. As always, I invite you to let me know that you're watching and where you're watching from. It's always fun for me to know who's out there and what parts of the world. We almost every week are international, whether that is a Brit joining us or a German or a Swede. We reached the world here from our little garage studio in San Diego, California. So this is a fun episode that I'm excited to get to Julie here in a minute. I'm gonna briefly read from my Perspective Shift article that I send out every Wednesday morning. You can see scrolling along the bottom here where you can go to get all of my writings and sign up for my free newsletter, Perspective Shift, where I like to write about religion and spirituality and psychology. Really, I'm just a hack at psychology, but religion and spirituality, I've got some credentials. I don't have that PhD that I mentioned a minute ago, which allows me to use my middle name, but I've got real world experience and I've got a bachelor's degree. Are you impressed? And I've got half of a master's degree. And then I got fired and lost the funding for that, but it doesn't matter. What am I talking about here? Yes. Okay. Let's do this. In addition to, if you want to let me know where you're watching from, I'd love to know the answer to the following question. It's time for the viewer sound off. That's right. This is the time in the show where I invite you to respond in the comments the answer to today's question, which is how or will, look, let me know if you will or will not, and why or why not. How and or will you celebrate July 4th, which is happening here in, what do we got? 4 days? Yeah, I think it falls on the 4th this year. Let me know how you're celebrating, if you're celebrating. There is quite obviously in our more progressive circles some complications with this date and what it represents. And also there is some really beautiful things about this date and what it represents. It's like life, it's complicated. It's complicated. Yay, America, one of the most successful experiments in liberal democracy, which has elevated the world in many, many ways. And the origin of our country and the history of how we got where we got and why, also really complex and complicated. So it's a weird holiday. And so I'm kind of just curious how you're going to celebrate, and or if you will. Just let me know in the comments. My wife and I are going to have a few people over, and we've got a deck in the back part of our house that has this gorgeous view over a lot of the south and western part of San Diego. And we have noticed, we've lived here 2 years now, we've noticed that we can see like 4 different fireworks shows across the city from our one deck. So we're like, this is a pretty sweet spot. Don't have to worry about parking. Don't have to worry about kids wanting to go home because they're tired. They can just go upstairs if they want. So we're having a few friends over Sunday afternoon to enjoy that. All right. Who do we got here? Susan is repping Port Townsend, Washington. Hi, Susan. So glad you are here with us today. Melissa says, thank you, Julie, for doing an audiobook. Woo! Can't wait to talk to Julie about that because I haven't done an audiobook yet. And I'm just curious about her experience on that. We got San Jacinto, California, halfway between Temecula and Palm Springs representing. What's up, Phil C. Gonzalez? What do we got? Susan says, not feeling much like celebrating this country. Fair. 100% fair. Shane says, not planning on celebrating July 4th, but if I do celebrate, it'll just be relaxing at home. Relax, Shane. Relax. You deserve it, buddy. James says, where's the sound? I wonder what that was in reference to. Oh, now he says, okay, got it. All right, glad we figured that out. Melanie's got no celebration plans for Sunday. Gonna go jet skiing. You go jet skiing, Melanie? That's super fun. I love that here. We got Austin in the house, choosing not to celebrate. Totally good. Susan's home, also choosing not to celebrate. Also fully support that. We've got Hollywood, Florida. Hi, Jeff. Glad you're here, Jeff. Feel like I haven't seen you around these parts in a while. Brooke says, how shall I celebrate for you? I'm in the UK. See, there we go. We got international. Hi, Brooke. Glad you're here. Let's do this now. Feel free to let me know if you have anything else to say about July 4th. But I'm going to move on to a couple things I want to tell you about. So the first is this. Some of you know, here, let's go ahead and clear that out. Some of you know that my wife and I do a podcast called The Kate and Colby Show. Well, recently we took a 4-week break from our live show, and we do live shows every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific. We took June off. So mark your calendar for next week, because we'll be back coming in hot with a ton of guests that tomorrow we're going to introduce to the world. Well, the world already knows about them. We're going to tell the world tomorrow what our lineup of guests are. But we do this live show, Kate and Colby Show, on Wednesday nights. But the show started as a podcast. We were a podcast for 3 years. And as much as we love the live show, we also miss those days when we just sat down, the two of us, with a couple of microphones and talked about things. And so we started this new thing called the Garage Sessions, where we're right here in our studio, but there's no cameras and it's not live. And we just hit record and we talk about some things. And so this yesterday, we released an episode called When You and Your Life Partner Believe Differently. So if you know anything about me and Kate, you know that we are very different in many, many ways. And some of those ways include beliefs, like deeply held religious, political beliefs. And it's been a journey for us to figure that out, and to give space for the other to grow and move and shift. And we have many times over the years heard from couples who have found themselves in a position. It's especially true for those who, like Kate and I, grew up in this real conservative evangelical world. And then one of the partners begins to shift out of that world into something maybe more progressive, inclusive, expansive, etc. That can be real jarring and scary for all sorts of reasons. And so anyway, so Kate and I have some stories around that, but then even the best part of it to me is the second half of the conversation, where Kate shares, she's like, people say, how are you okay disagreeing with Colby so much? And her response now is like, well, I'm really not. Like, when we have these disagreements, it's not like I'm just in some Zen state of, oh, all is well, that is fine. No, it's like, okay, this is really hard. My body's reacting to the fact that we disagree. And then she talks about, she has 3 buckets that she sort of like, okay, so what's the source of my response here? And I think it's incredibly smart and insightful, and it can be really helpful for people. So here's just a little tidbit. Here's like 60 seconds audio of our conversation, just to whet your appetite. And you can get this at kateandcolby.com.
When we were dating, that was a huge thing. It was a constant back and forth. That was like our language, dating language. It was constantly. To
be equally yoked.
Just making sure, like, you think this, right? Like, just making sure you think this, right? And just making sure you know this Bible passage, and just make sure you know what it means. And it was like this constant checks and balances.
I don't remember that.
Really?
But I entirely believe you.
You were the driver of it. Of course you were.
That sounds
like,
yeah.
You were the spiritual leader.
To be equally yoked. And
yeah. That's why when you tell the story of then when we were sitting on the little park bench outside the playground of our first rental house in Arizona, and you started to question heaven and hell and that salvation atonement message that we were given.
Big one to question.
And for the first time I was hearing you do that, which was, if any belief were to set a person off to feel like threatened, by someone not believing that, it would be that one. That would be the biggest one.
The ultimate.
And we were married, so we really, really were supposed to believe the same. And you just like no warning, no anything, like just dropped the bomb. And then you tell the story of my huge reaction of you need to go in the house and like get right with God right now and figure this out. Like, but like, of course that's how I responded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course I did.
Yeah.
Yes, of course I did, because that is what we were both trained to do. And not only were we both like conditioned and trained to have that reaction when someone shares that they've shifted or feel differently, but we had also created that culture together in our marriage.
So anyways, that's a little bit of the conversation that we have, and you can get that at, again, kateandcolby.com. We're on iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher and Podbean, I believe. Those are the garage sessions. And I think that's a really, really good conversation we had. And so I invite you to go check those out, and then mark your calendars, because Wednesday nights, like I said, starting next week, we're coming in hot with some really exciting peoples. All right, now let's go to
When we
not
were
that again.
dating.
Wrong scene. This is the one I wanted to go to. So today on my Substack page, which is called Perspective Shift, I announced something that I'm very excited about. I announced that I have now 2 partners for who are gonna be the recipients of a portion of every single UnClobber course that gets purchased for forever. And this is retroactively too. So if anybody has already bought the course since I launched it this last month, I'm going to go back and 10% of that. And I knew from the beginning, I knew 2 things when I launched these courses. I knew, one, that I had to find a way to give them for free, because this sort of wholeness and liberation from toxic theology, money should not be a barrier for that. So we've got the UnClobber scholarship program, which allows people, if they need the course or want the course, and for whatever reason can't afford it, it's there. It's free. Just grab it. It's for you. And then I also knew that I wanted to use some of the proceeds of this course to support and encourage and back organizations that are run by and for and with LGBTQ individuals. And so Beloved Arise is a fantastic organization that launched, I think, a couple of years ago. And they are primarily focused on LGBTQ youth who are in that space primarily, and maybe a less than affirming and welcoming space. And so I love their work. I'm excited to partner with them. And then Bemba Press is an imprint of Our Bible app. And Our Bible app is a fantastic resource that has been cranking out amazing content, queer content, people of color content for a couple of years now. And then I didn't bring the book down with me, but then they ran this Kickstarter campaign a couple months ago, which I was stoked to back. And they put out their first book from Bemba Press called The Destructionists. I don't think that's the title. The Deconstructionists Playbook. And anyway, so I love what they're doing. So that is like happening. It's now, it took me a little bit to get the ducks in a row, but the ducks are in their row. And so today on my Substack page, I got to go in and talk about that a little bit. And so you can read more about that over, again, at my Substack page. And this is in the context, part of this is in the context of, for the month of June, I've been writing about privilege, talking about privilege, thinking about like part 1, what is privilege? Just sort of bare bones simplicity. Like, let's just start with the basic understanding of what it is. Part 2, okay, so how do you move from an awareness of it to then listening and learning from other people that don't have it, to then just sitting with the tension and not like trying to just change the world right away. And then stage 4 of, okay, now act, now do something with that privilege if you have it. And then part 3, which was last week, okay, so you've got some privilege and you've moved through the stages in some way, and you're now at this space of how can I do something with this? What can I do with this? And so I outlined 4 different ways that people might leverage or use or steward their privilege, as well as I talked about a dissenting point that some people think that the whole idea of stewarding privilege is problematic in and of itself. And I completely hold space and honor that as well. But in that 4th stage of talking about how to use your privilege, I think one of the ways, and I outlined this last week, is people that have such as myself, that have sort of these layers of societal privilege. I feel a sort of invitation / challenge / calling / responsibility to then work toward a world in which there are less and less of these categorical privileges simply by virtue of how and when and where and to whom you're born. And one of those ways that you can use that privilege is to elevate the voices of the marginalized and then directly support their work. And so that's for many reasons, the driver behind why I wanted to ensure that portions of the proceeds from these courses went to these two organizations. And so I share a little bit on the article today about Bemba Press and who that is. Here's the mission, one of the mission statements from Bemba Press. Check this out. Bemba Press will focus on publishing the voices of a marginalized many instead of the philosophizing of a privileged few. I think that's just really well said. We are committed to a diversity in text that echoes the evolving Christian world we find ourselves in today. So I love what they're doing. I'm so excited to see what they're going to be putting out in the years to come. And then Beloved Arise, like I said, is just really filling this much needed niche of queer youth of faith. And so I go follow them on Instagram. They've got some great resources, counseling and academic resources and accessible, just really good stuff over at belovedarise.org, I believe is there. Yeah. So anyways, love those two groups. And so if you haven't yet purchased a course, or you're watching this now or watching this later and you're like, oh, I think I'll check out the course, just know that a part of what you're paying for in the course is going to go to support these incredible organizations. And then today, you can see it there on the screen. Today is the last day to use the Pride 21 promo code at checkout to save 21%. That's my launch month of June Pride special to save 21% on any of the courses that you would like. All right. And then in the event that this is your first time hanging out with me or haven't been here in a week, this is the fourth in my series that I've been calling Pride Month Conversations. Started 3 weeks ago with Ashton and Colby, talked about the gift of being transgender. And then 2 weeks ago, Justin Lee came on and we talked about the gifts of being gay. And then last week was Coach Yeamah, and she had some, I'm always inspired and encouraged by Coach whenever she's on, offering her beautiful, unique perspective of being a Black bisexual Christian woman. And then today, as you know, because I've said it 14 times now, I'm going to be joined by Julie Rodgers, whose newest book came out today, called Outlove. And I'm going to put it digitally on the screen and physically on the screen because I want you to buy this book. There's a link down below in the description. I want you to buy this book. You will love it. I just don't know what else to tell you. Like, you will love it. I kind of want to reach out to Jeff Probst and suggest that for Survivor, they do outwit, outplay, outlast, and then just add outlove at the end there. Just add it. Add outlove to the gameplay, Jeff Probst, of Survivor, and see what happens. See if suddenly you have contestants that are not voted off the island because they're the most loving in the group. Look, it's just a suggestion, Jeff, okay? I'll still watch your show because it's still one of my favorites if you don't take the suggestion, but I do think it's worth considering. All right, speaking of worth considering, I would now like to invite onto the show and join me in welcoming the one, the only, Julie Rodgers. Hey!
Aw, Colby, hi.
What's going on, Jules? Can I call you Jules?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
like
Okay.
my childhood nickname.
Okay, all right. Because I don't know if you saw
it's like laid back me, you know, when I'm just super chill, down for whatever.
All right.
That's Jules.
So I don't know if you saw the opening, but I dared call you my friend, even though we didn't really meet till about an hour ago. So I don't want to put any pressure on you. You do not need
precious.
to reciprocate. If we
It's
end up
really
just not
precious.
being
I received
friends,
this.
that's fine. Like not all relationships are meant to be, and I hope you'll consider at least my application for friendship.
Our bi-coastal friendship. This is
Yes.
okay. This is
Okay.
really meaningful. I feel, thank you.
Good. We're off to a good start. All right, Julie, thank you for being here with me today. I've got a lot of things that I want to talk with you about and hear from you. And I know right out the gate that I'm going to be unsatisfied with the fact that there's just so much that I want to talk about and so little time. But I will start with just a nice little layup. And notice I use the term layup because in reading your book, I learned how much you used to love and play basketball. I also loved and played basketball all growing up. Are you watching the NBA playoffs? And if so, what is your current take?
I'm not.
Okay.
I had to give up sports like maybe a decade ago because I was like, I mean, I still am like a very active person, but like following sports is a hobby that takes too much time. And I was like, I could only,
That's fair.
I started following like politics. I started following like, you know, broader public conversations. I didn't have time for sports as well anymore. So I just had to give up knowing what's going on in that universe.
Okay.
And I
All
bless
right.
those who do.
All right. Well, we can still be friends. That's fine. Most of my friends anymore don't really do sports. So I keep looking for like, where's my sports friends? Where's my peoples? Most of my friends now
I'll
are
still
like
run
the
with
sports
you.
balls. I don't.
I'll
I'm
totally
sorry.
run with you or play beach volleyball or.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't run. I will power walk next to you, but beach volleyball sounds super fun. Volleyball, I love volleyball, so that sounds fun. All right. Well, then don't tell me about the NBA playoffs. Clearly, we'll just move on to the next question, which is fine. But when you did love basketball, who was your team? Were you a college sports? Were you an NBA, WNBA?
I did prefer college.
Okay.
I love college basketball. You know, I had 2 older brothers, so men's college basketball was usually what was on, but I was here for it. Loved it.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah.
Right on. Okay, so we are in month of Pride here as a nation. In fact, today is the last day, I believe, June 30th, right? There's only one day, or there's only 30 days in June. So I've started each of the conversations with my previous guests just asking if you would share your memory of your first Pride. And this actually, I believe, is one of the stories you talk about in your book, right? In San Francisco?
Totally.
Yes. So, share as little or as much detail as you want, but what was your first Pride like? And I know for the people that don't know you, they're going to need a bit of context for why your experience was the way it was. And we'll get into more of that, but just feel free to share how your first Pride was.
Yeah. So it is in the book. It's a chapter in the book. And I probably will talk about it better in that than I will here because I put, like, as you know, like hundreds of hours probably into just that chapter alone.
Yeah. Writers are like, I spent so much time writing the book. Do I really have to talk about it? I'm not a talker. I'm a writer. I know. It's a thing.
We could be both.
Yeah.
But I was coming out of, when I came out, I was in a really conservative evangelical community, and my mom took me to a local ministry called Living Hope Ministries, which is also known as an ex-gay ministry, which is also known as conversion therapy in Christian communities. I then proceeded to spend the next 8 to 10 years of my life, depending on how you define my involvement, involved in those kinds of, in those circles. And it wasn't until Exodus International shut down and I was sort of in the out, openly gay, but committed to lifelong celibacy space that I had a friend that was a little bit of a complicated friendship. And at that time, identified as female, and she was like, let's go to Pride in San Francisco. We're both already there. So I was like, okay, sure, why not? What can be so sinful and immoral about watching a parade? And then sure enough, I get in the crowd full of sweaty bodies, and people are spilling beer on me, and there's men with just socks over their penises, and
you, well, that's a great place to stop too. You went 0 to freaking 60. I mean, you went to the San Francisco Pride. You could have warmed up in, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where there's maybe 7 people. No, you went all the way.
Yeah, per the usual. I definitely started feeling like I was sinning just by being there, and had this major kick. I saw that there were CrossFit floats coming by, and that there was a sense in which much of it was benign. But at that point, since I still believed that same-sex relationships were sinful and that it was wrong, it had this sort of kickback for me of major just fear and internalized homophobia exploding within. So I started being flooded with all these, this is called anxiety too. I started flooding with all of these verses from Romans, though they knew the truth, they approved of those who were doing evil, and I was am I approving of those doing evil? And it was just this
Paul's
total
right.
panic.
Paul's right. These are shameless acts.
It was looking back, it's
rough,
so
man.
interesting
It's rough.
when I look back on that experience and see like how much beauty there was that I just couldn't see at that time because of the
Sure.
lens through
Of
which I
course.
was watching.
How could you see it? Yeah.
But yeah, it was. So my first Pride was traumatic, to
Yeah.
say the least, just because of my own sort of internalized homophobia and
and,
trauma.
and I imagine confirmation bias was kicking in. Like you talk
little
about
bit.
talk about seeing what you wanted to see or seeing what you were programmed to see. Sorry, not what you wanted to
Totally,
see.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, and of course, when there were
good gravy.
churches like, "All God's children belong," I was like, "License to sin," like rolling down the street. It was bad. It was like one of my worst.
You're the only person in the crowd
moments.
booing the churches. Boo!
It's rough. It was real
Oh,
rough.
Jules. How is it?
yeah, a
How
lot
is it?
going on.
How is it now for you, though? How
I love
is
Pride now.
Yeah.
It's amazing. A couple years ago, we marched with our church. We go to the Washington National Cathedral, and we marched with our church in Pride, and it was like so interesting to remember that. And there was this moment when our church started singing "This Little Light of Mine" as we were walking down, and you could see people in the crowd like starting to tear up and sing with us, and I was just like, this is the most
golden.
like moving thing ever
Yeah.
to just be like, sort of honoring the humanity of these people, and a lot like for them to be truly seen by people who are walking like in the name of God. It was like super meaningful and beautiful.
Right on. All right, let's dig in a bit to this book, this gorgeous book. I told you when we were doing the setup, I'm just so freaking proud of you. Like I don't know you, and you don't know me, and so, that's just a random dude telling you that. But this, like you did a thing, Julie. You
Thank you.
reached into places and spaces of your soul that no one would have faulted you for just sort of keeping to yourself for all of time, because the pain and the awkwardness and the tension, all of those things that are real about anyone who has survived the level of trauma that you have, like no one would have faulted you for just being like, yeah, you know what, that story, feel free to just keep that one, to you. And yet you dug into it and you pulled it out. You excavated your soul in ways that honestly at times were shocking to me. Not so much because I have a tangential awareness to the ex-gay conversion therapy world. I have friends who have endured similar things, so I've heard some of the stories. But there's something about following you in your journey that was like, it was extra heartbreaking. It was extra sad for me to read. I just kept wanting, and I'm sure you've gotten feedback similar to this, but I kept wanting to reach into the pages and just hug you and hold you and tell you this is not okay. This is not fair. Like, you don't deserve this. Damn it. Like, you don't deserve this. I wanted to be like the Robin Williams to your Matt Damon. Like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. And I was just so moved. So when I say I'm proud of you, part of that is just driven by this sense of you didn't have to do this, and you did it, and it's amazing. And so I'm just really freaking proud of you. So well done. Well done on publishing this.
Thank you.
It came out a week. Yeah, you're welcome. It came out a week ago. How are you feeling now, a week post launch? What's this week been like for you?
I mean, I'm honestly feeling like I poured like my big feeling vulnerable heart into these pages and told a lot of really deeply personal stories in a way that I tried to make as nuanced and human as possible. And I'm feeling like that's out in the public now and on the internet, which is I'm feeling a little vulnerable. I'm feeling relieved. I feel very much held by my community. I have like an incredible group of people in my life who have just been like all in to support me in all the ways. It's all women pretty much too. Like there's a couple like dudes who like take care of the kids while their wives are out here supporting me, but it's just been like I've been saying it feels like they're my midwives, and I've always wanted midwives, even though I'll never have a baby. So I feel like it's just super, super held and supported.
I'm so glad.
But yeah, overall, fairly raw. I also was at Tribeca the week before the book launch because I'm featured in a documentary called Pray Away that also really gets into and shows the ex-gay movement from within, and much of it through the lens of former leaders who have since renounced that and are working to like end conversion therapy. But I was sort of like the survivor thread in it. And so it's going to release on Netflix in early August. But it was really like a lot to be at Tribeca and to watch this like deeply personal story of mine on a big screen in an audience with a bunch of people. And like to feel all of that and then to release this book a week later, it's like wild timing. And I feel like I could use a lot of time with my cats. And
Yes,
also really honored and really pleased with the feedback so far. Just feeling like real people being like, oh my gosh, like this has really moved me, or this has really challenged me in a helpful way. And so that's why I wrote it. So
for those who are catching up here, this is Julie Rodgers, and her book Outlove just came out a week ago, and the back says a captivating memoir about coming of age at the center of the battle between evangelical Christians and the LGBTQ plus community. And one of the things I wanted to pick your brain about is because you tell the story of growing up in a super conservative home, learning to fear the gays, and then discovering I think I might actually be one. Like, oh boy. And I think there are many reasons why children end up not feeling safe in their home. And certainly growing up in the context that you did, learning to fear the very types of people that you yourself could feel yourself emerging into. I don't know that there's I can't imagine too many other forms of not feeling safe that can compete with the severity of that you were not who your family expected you to be. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you think that lack of safety growing up, how do you think that lack of safety has impacted you now into adulthood as you look back on that?
I think I learned, some patterns in that context that, like, in order to survive, like in order to get through the days, I had to say and do and believe what other people wanted and needed me to say, do, or believe. And it's been a really long, hard journey that's taken a lot of therapy to develop like my own sense of self, of like, who am I apart from who other people in my life want and need me to be? Can I first even just like acknowledge that to myself, see and name that, acknowledge it to myself, and then can I find the courage to say that to other people, especially when I know it's going to be met with like friction or conflict or disapproval. And so that's been that might sound easy to those of you who are like healthy and well-adjusted, but that's been an extremely difficult and painful process for me.
Are those people out there? Do they exist?
And so yeah, I think, that's just the one that comes to the top of my mind because it's been some of the work I've been doing for the last few years, but we could unpack that for the rest of this time. And I think I'll be probably discovering new ways that trauma in my childhood will play out over the rest of my life, unfortunately, in different ways that I'll hopefully grow through and move and heal beyond. But it's reality. It
is reality, and it doesn't really ever go away. I don't think. I experienced a different type of trauma from you, and am, even as of last night, still working through the residual ways in which that impacts me as a grown-ass man with adult relationships that I'm like, oh, I'm still living as an 8-year-old. Cool. All right, awesome. This is super fun. And so when you talk about how you didn't really ever get to figure out who you were because you could only ever experience a degree of security and belonging and loving by being something else. Good Lord, that takes a toll. Yeah. So I'm stoked for you. Do you watch Gilmore Girls, or did you watch Gilmore Girls?
I I never have, to be honest. I might have watched like 45 seconds of one episode and was like, not for me.
Totally fine. There's a scene in there where Lorelai, the main protagonist, is late at night sitting at her kitchen table, and her daughter Rory walks in, and Lorelai's got like all these packages of Pop-Tarts, just half eaten, ripped open, different flavors and whatnot. And Rory's like, "Mom, what are you doing?" And Lorelai says, "I'm trying to figure out if I like Pop-Tarts or not." She's like, "What do you mean? Of course you like Pop-Tarts." And she goes on to talk about like she just grew up eating Pop-Tarts and believing and like that she assumed she liked Pop-Tarts, but now as an adult, do I really like Pop-Tarts? And that scene stuck with me because we have these moments where we get to new stages of our development, of our awareness, about our backstory, about who we are, about what we've survived, and we're like, I don't know if I know who I am. I know the various chameleons I was expected to play. I know the various roles that I projected into the world, but who the heck am I? And so part of this book is you sharing that journey with us. So thank you for letting us into that world of yours. I have a question here for you. I'm going to attempt to set it up a bit, and I hope it makes sense. I'm not even sure I framed the question well enough for it to make sense. So if it doesn't make sense, we can talk about it. But let me try and set it up. So I was struck in reading your story by how much of what you described, and these were all sort of really negative contexts, but I was struck by how much they made sense. Like there was a part of it like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And yet at the same time, these were factors that contributed to yours and other people's suffering. So there, for instance, you talk about how your mom found belonging and community in the church, like people that she could do potlucks with and share life and birthdays with, which was great. You write about the vulnerability of the groups that shared during the Living Hope stage of your life, during this XK. Like that makes sense how vulnerability bonds people. You write about how this guy Ricky, who was your mentor / father figure for a good portion of your life, would talk about grace during his messages. And you're like, oh, this is refreshing. This is a refreshing break from all the judgment. And that makes sense. Of course, hearing grace talked about would feel really good. You write about how you learned that humans can do destructive behaviors and then unpack that and connect it to mental stress and struggles. And that's good. And that makes sense. And then at the same time, at each one of those scenarios, at each one of those sort of plot points, there is a dark side. There's a downside to it, to these otherwise noble endeavors. Like, yeah, people want and need to belong, and yet oftentimes we end up in the wrong crowd. Sharing vulnerably is absolutely a path towards connection and deep intimacy, and yet in the context that you shared, like it was all framed as bad. Like the vulnerable shares were framed as bad and wicked, and you should feel bad about them. So it's like vulnerable share, good connection, but how it's being framed, not good. Preaching about grace, obviously I'm all for preaching about grace, and yet in the contents you experienced it was misused, because it was like, how gracious that God would accept a sinner like you in that context. So I just, over the course of like 3 chapters, these moments kept coming up in your story. And now as you sort of like, as you were writing this and thinking back on this now, how do you sort of think about this odd mixture of the things that seemed good and right and sort of made sense, but also harmful and at the same time bad? Does that sort of question, observation make sense?
Yeah, I think so each of these are a little bit different scenarios. So I'll just talk about one in particular,
Great.
and then if you want to unpack a different one, we can. But I would say take somebody like, Ricky and some of these leaders in this community who, Ricky had me over for lunch and cooked meals for me every Sunday afternoon for over the course of almost 10 years. I spent holidays with him. He was with me. He was at my graduations. He was at my basketball games. He was there with me when I had some really hard emotional sort of fallout with my parents and family. And I think it's really important to be able to talk about the ways that we experience kindness in communities that cause harm or may even be abusive, because it explains why we stay. Like, if it was just this like completely nightmarish abusive thing where I was like chained in a basement and people came down and electrocuted me every morning and evening,
Sure.
obviously you escape, but your first chance.
Sure.
But when there is abusive things at play and a lot of manipulation, but it's woven into these other kindnesses and acts of love that are meeting real needs in our lives as humans, and especially as like kids who have been alienated and disenfranchised. So I think it's a little bit like how it's so hard for women to leave or spouses to leave an abusive relationship because like it's complicated, and of course they're of age and old enough, but that feels like the smallest thing to consider when you look at the whole of a human life and relationships and emotional needs and psychological impulses and connections. And so those, to me, those parts of it that you're like, yeah, that makes sense, it explains the insidious nature of these communities that cause this kind of harm and how they can be so successful over such a long period of time.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, it's complicated. Humans are complicated. Humans are a strange mixture of beautiful, wonderful, well-intentioned benevolence mixed with selfish, I don't know, just we're complicated, right? Yeah. So you and I were raised to believe that we were 100% depraved, total depravity. Like there's nothing good about us. And you talk about this in the book. Like
filthy
rags, and the heart is deceitful, wicked above all else. Like don't trust anything in your body. Don't trust anything really but your pastor's interpretation of some dead literature. We're complicated beings. So we're told to
and John Piper.
Well, yes, Lord bless St. John. Do I have a boo button on here to go with the applause? But also at the same time, to flip the pendulum the other way, which I think a lot of us do when we sort of leave that world of total depravity, we swing the pendulum the other way to be like, no, you are entirely good and everything about you is perfect. And that works for a while because it heals some of those necessary wounds. Be like, oh, I'm not just a pile of shit. I actually have some good things about me. But then I think we wake up at some point to realize, oh, I also have incredible capacity to hurt people. I also have incredible capacity to make myself suffer. Okay, so I love how Francis Spufford talks about we all have the human propensity to fuck things up. That's what he calls it. I'm like, that's a good way to frame it. We all are this strange cocktail. So
it's one of my faves.
Are you familiar with that?
I love that book. I've read it like 5 times.
So good. Unapologetic for those out there who are curious. Oh, it's so fun that you know that. So I think you handled that really well in your book, Julie. Giving full depth, the full depth of the humanity to these people that were, in some cases, were your family. The tenderness with which you wrote about the people in your family that was complicated, like it's complicated and it's hard and it's painful. And I told you when we were doing the sound check that I finished the book this morning, and I won't tell people how it ends or what, but I was like, I need to know how it ends because it's painful. And so I just think you did all that really well. Yeah, I think you did all that really, really well. Was that one of your cats?
Jack's about to try to get up in this.
That's awesome. Hey, buddy. Jack. Hey, buddy. Jack. We see you. We got a podcat in the house.
Our cats love to center themselves in these conversations.
I'm here for it. So speaking of Ricky, in chapter 3, you describe meeting him for the first time. And you tell the story of being in his office, and he gives an explanation for how he believes, and many people in that world believe, that sort of human sexuality is formed and then disformed. And you write it out, and then you acknowledge that back then you're like, damn, that kind of makes sense. Like the way, and this even goes back to what I said a minute ago, where part of it does make sense. He talks about how the brain is elastic and we can create new neural pathways. Like we know that about brain science. You can create new pathways, but he was using that sort of real research into neuroscience and sort of mixing it with this pseudo-religious science, be like, so you can change the pathways of your sexuality and make your whole brain different. I'm like, what teenager wouldn't buy into that? Honestly, like it's so freaking compelling. It maps on perfectly to the religious stories that you were told. It's got enough sort of realistic sounding science in it that's mapped on with accurate neuroscience. And so anyway, do you know, is that still sort of how it's framed? Is that still kind of the pseudoscience of what is happening in the ex-gay world? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So,
I was really
so,
hoping
for
that was one of
instance-
those things that they left behind. Like Tim
Oh,
LaHaye.
no.
Okay.
You could actually go to Living Hope's website right now because they're active, they're alive and thriving. They have over 10,000 people on their online forums. And Ricky speaks in megachurches with tens of thousands of people. Wow.
Okay.
Like the Village Church and Watermark Church, or the Antioch Church, like these big evangelical churches with like hip young pastors. And so if you go to their website, you can actually like see and download these talks that I write about and see that that's still what they're teaching. And I think that's why it's so important to like believe, like, you know, when every major medical association has come out and said, this practice is harmful.
Yes.
It's damaging. It does not work. That should carry weight for the adults in these communities, because a kid's not going to know the difference. Like, we're going to be like, oh yeah, sure, that sounds fine, that makes sense, and then we don't find out that it actually doesn't work until we're 10 years later, when we've got all this baggage and all this trauma and have maybe like picked up a meth addiction along the way to cope. So
That was
yeah,
heartbreaking.
it's just like we need to be able to trust the adults in the room to listen to medical professionals and to like have some integrity in what they practice.
All right, not the answer I wanted, but it's the answer we need, because our work is not done, right? I mean, I just finished last night. I finished the bonus chapter. So my first book, UnClobber, the publisher's doing a second edition with like a study guide and a preaching series, and so I wrote an afterword for it. And one of the things I reflect on is like, I can't wait for this book to not be printed anymore. I can't wait for this to be like entirely irrelevant and obsolete. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want this to keep selling. I don't want to keep having to. Obviously, I'm glad that it is, because with each person that buys it, we're moving the needle, so that's good. But good gravy, can we like get to a point where the majority of the Christian church is now like, oh yeah, we've totally messed that. We're like, we've been wrong on that. Like, the Bible does not say we've always thought it is said. So I'm really hoping that tomfoolery pseudoscience will also go the way of the dodo bird at some point. But I don't know. Until then, you and I will just keep on fighting the good fight, I guess. Speaking of fighting the good fight. Okay. So you, bless your heart, and I mean that with like all of the, I don't have any Southern in me, but with all the Southern charm that I can, like, but like you tried so hard to fit in this world that desperately needed you, did not want you. This world of evangelical Christianity that, as you eventually say in the book, like used you to be this voice of, same-sex marriages are not God's design. Like, if you're gay, be celibate. They needed you to be their narrator, their talking head for that. Because as one of the characters, Gabe Lyons, said, he's like, if I say it, people just think I'm being bigoted. Well, yeah, maybe listen to that a little bit. But then if you say it, like, you have credibility. So they needed you. They did not want you. They did not want you. Just painful to read. Now looking back, and I can't imagine how painful it was to write, let alone experience. To be like, oh my God, I was not wanted in those rooms. I was just I was a prop. I was a figure. I was a tool of manipulation. Like, I don't know. How does that? What comes up for you now when you reflect on those years? And for those who haven't read the book or know Julie's story, there was a period of time where Julie was in between these worlds of trying to not be gay anymore, not God's design, to then this world of, nope, sorry, super gay, can't not be gay, but also still, okay, a traditional approach to the Bible and sexuality. And then that middle space, you worked at Wheaton College for a year, super evangelical. You worked or you spoke on different speaking circuits that were super conservative. So you're in this space of like, it was a super noble effort, but I could not wait to get to the chapter where you left everyone. I could not wait. I'm like, get this girl out of here. Get her out. Go. Go.
I felt that way as I was reading it in the editing process. I was just like, Jesus, like, you poor kid.
Yes.
Just like, just leave.
Of course, it's not that simple.
But, you know, it's not. Yeah. And when I look back, I think, you know, I was able to do such sacred work with so many of the queer people in those communities that, to me, it was worth it. It was worth it for those relationships I built, and it was worth it for me to be able to see, to like truly see, because I don't know that I was going to be able to shift and move and leave if I didn't see both like the impact on students and the vulnerability there, and also like the hypocrisy and like abuse of power elsewhere, and the ways that they were more concerned with managing their image than caring for the most vulnerable. Like I think I had to see that to be able to, like, in full on, completely clear conscience, move to an affirming space. And, you know, I know, like, people from from Living Hope, they used to say, I used to remember them saying about people like me, like, oh, you know, they know the truth, like they're convicted and they're just fighting it, and you know, maybe someday they'll come to the end of themselves and come home. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am out here like rejoicing in having been freed from that, and like I cannot believe that I believed them for so long, and that I continue to be so duped. It's not to say like all evangelicals are bad, just like in this particular roles I was in with the particular people and the ways that they were manipulating me for their own agendas. Like it was so wrong. And I've never looked back for a single day and had a single second thought that wasn't the right move to leave.
Yeah. I was really grateful that you didn't pull a lot of punches. Like you did show some receipts. And 2, I was hoping you showed more. How much did you, and you don't have to obviously share any detail, but how much did you sort of, if 100% would have been like, everybody's going on blast, and then out the final manuscript, like how much percentage do you feel?
I probably cut about 60% of what I had and kept 40% based on the question of like, is this critical to moving the story forward? And if it wasn't, then like, if I'm just trying to air something, or if I just think this is like so shocking that like, that's not a good enough reason to share this. So can
you share the rest of that content like in a drip marketing? So like sign up here at Julie Rodgers newsletter, and over the course of the next 6 months, I'll release, because girl, you would blow up your email list. I just want you to like, look, that's my book marketing launch guide. Come online right there. So just let me know if you want more tips.
It's been interesting how many people who read early copies were like, thank you for naming this person. Yes. We all knew this. OMG. Yes. And I'm like, oh, wow, we did? Why didn't anybody tell me? Like, so it's been like I guess nice to have that confirmation that a lot of people out there can, you know, sort of back me.
Yeah, 100%. One of the... So Gabe Lyons wrote that book, Unchristian, I believe. Mm-hmm. And when I first got the artwork back from my from my publisher, I'm like, y'all, that looks real close to Unchristian. Like it's the same exact design as like Unchristian. Is anybody worried about that? And they're like, no, we think it's different enough. I'm like, okay, it's not different enough, but whatever. I do like it's the cover's great. But now like years down the road, I'm like, actually, I kind of like it. I kind of like that. It's just, it's like, nah, come at me, bro. Anyway, okay. As I was reading you the stories of your life where you're on this like speaking circuit for Living Hope, and then even for the Q conferences, sort of being this poster girl for this this version of Christianity that says that you can stop being gay, and that holiness is where it's at, and celibacy is where it's at. And it took me back to a couple of years ago. I went to a little one-day seminar here in town put on by Preston Sprinkle, who's like, I would say like Gabe Lyons, but nicer. you know,
They work together a lot.
Do they? Okay, well there you go.
Yeah.
Really nice, lovely guy, Preston is, but is absolutely non-affirming in his theology. And so, you know, I wrote up a whole review of his conference. I'm like, in terms of chocolate-covered turds, like his chocolate does taste the best. Like it's the best chocolate-covered turd you're ever going to taste, but it's still turd. Like it's still at the core of it. And I remember at about the lunch, you know, after the lunch break, he brought up his version of Julie Rodgers. And he brought up this young guy who just gave the textbook story that you describe. And I remember sitting there just feeling like, what is it, 2 years, 3 years? Like I don't want to be super skeptic or super cynical. But in my mind, I'm like, I don't know, give this guy 2 years, 3 years, and he won't be giving this talk anymore. Like this is just not a real thing. Like, and I need to check myself whenever I go there because I would love to hear your thoughts on this because I'm sure you know better than I do. There probably are some people who do find a version of wholeness and well-being and flourishing in the capacity of I'm trying hard to not be gay and trying to live a different life. Like I believe that some people do find a version of happiness and wholeness there. I find myself skeptical. And yet at the same time, can't we be skeptical? Like we could probably apply that to everybody in life who's like happy and whole and like, but are you really? But anyway, so I'm reading you perform for these organizations and thinking back to that experience of when I heard a guy share that. And I guess I'm wondering like, how do you feel now on the other side of that about these queer Christians who write the books, give the talks still, but insist like, but I'm not gay anymore, or I'm gay and I'm not actively living it because it's so much healthier and holier. Like they've overcome their struggle. Like what's your feelings about that today?
I tend to feel a lot of compassion for any version of queer people in the Christian church, like whether they identify as like same-sex attracted or celibate or, you know, out proud and poly, like whatever they are. I think like, I know that we've all grown up in these contexts where we felt so much shame and felt so misunderstood, and like there was such loneliness. And so I tend to blame like the Preston type people more for wanting to sort of like bring these people as props and have a lot more compassion for the actual human that's in that situation. And I think where, you know, if you look at something like the Revoice conference, where there's a bunch of queer Christians who like actively run and plan a sort of retreat conference for celibate or non-affirming queer people to come together and experience fellowship, and like I think that's great. I think it's not what I would point people to. It's not.
You do sincerely think that's great?
I genuinely do. I think
Okay.
I don't think that's a life-giving theology, and I would never point people to it. But for those who do hold it for one reason or another, I really do want them to be able to find community and belonging with each other.
Well said. I love
especially when they don't sort of like turn that outward and come at the rest of us for living our lives. And I find that most queer people don't do that. It's the straight folks that come for us.
No,
and
we're the worst.
Most of us are pretty. I've gotten quite a few messages from celibate, side B, traditional queers who've read my book already and been like, "Thank you so much. I'm so moved. I'm so happy for you."
That's awesome.
Like, there's just the sense of like we're family, even if we're on different sides of this theological divide.
Yeah, I've been. Thanks for sharing that. I've been at our church the last couple of weeks. I've been. The larger context is one of our mottos at our church is "It all belongs." And so Kate and I, for the last couple of months, have been breaking down, like, what do we mean by that? And what do we not mean by it? Because really, does it all belong? And then the last couple of weeks specifically, I've been looking at how that works within the context of religious diversity, because our community is very diverse with regards to religious ideas. Like we planted 7 years ago, and our motto was uniquely Christian, but not exclusively. And that holds pretty true 7 years later. Like just a wide range of religious beliefs. And so I was trying to explore, like, what does that mean to say it all belongs in the context of such diversity of beliefs? And I've been working through, Julie, Romans 14, where Paul's writing to this church that's fractured along a number of lines, and one of those is religious ideas. Most of the church believed it was totally fine to eat meat and drink wine. And then there were some among them who were like, we still think you shouldn't eat meat or drink wine, and we should do religious festivals. And Paul called them the weaker in faith, and the ones who were like, no, you can eat whatever you want, the stronger in faith. Anyway, he makes this argument in there where he says that for the person who's weak in faith, and quick side note, these words strong and weak for the viewer, whether now or later, I find like really pejorative and potentially unhelpful until I sort of got into it. So if you're at all curious about that, check out my message at Sojourn Grace from last week. Okay, end of side note. But here's what I wanted to throw at you is Paul says that for the weak in faith, for those who think that eating meat is wrong, Paul does this this ethical moral move where he says if they think it's wrong, then eating for them actually is wrong. Like it becomes wrong. Like, so he has this very subjective hold on morality. Because he goes on to say, like, I actually am convinced that you can eat whatever you want. So he might say, or I might say like this, like objectively, it's objectively true that no food is unclean and you can eat whatever you want. And yet, subjectively, for some people, their convictions are still, eating this thing would be wrong. Paul actually affirms if they eat it, for them it is wrong. Like there's really no difference between the subjective experience of doing a thing that violates your convictions with actually doing something that is maybe more objectively wrong. So as I finished your book today, I was thinking about those, you referenced side B, we talked about that with Justin Lee a couple weeks ago, the LGBTQ individuals who feel like for them the right move is celibacy, like there isn't a path for them for wholeness in same-sex relationships. And I was just thinking about them this morning and been like, you know what? The incorrect posture for those of us in a more strong faith, and again, there's reasons why we use those language, but for the more strong faith, which is you can totes have sexual relationship with someone of the same gender, it's fine. For those who are in the context of which it's not, like, it's actually not okay for them. So the right move is not to say, no, just do it, you're fine. The right move is to give them all the space and safety and non-judgment that they need so that if their convictions do eventually change, it can. And then when their convictions change, then they can eat meat. But to do it beforehand, actually, it is wrong for them. And I just think that was a really interesting move for Paul to make. I disagree with Paul on a ton of things, but I really liked his insight on that of like, no, if they're convinced it's wrong, it is wrong for them. And the strong in faith need to sort of hold space for that and respect that.
Yeah, I think what I really appreciate about that text, and just so you know, my computer, this is so embarrassing, my computer's going to die soon. I'm at 5%.
That's
so,
right. I've already kept you a few minutes after anyway, so.
I just wanted to put it out there because my charger's in my backpack downstairs in my bedroom. So if that happens, this has been amazing.
Thank you.
And I am really delighted. And it's really great to see some people I know on this. So
good.
But what I was going to say is what I love about that passage is how is basically talking about like, hey, let's be kind and considerate and compassionate, and let's like really honor one another amidst these disagreements, and like really just coming back to Jesus's command to love and saying like, yes, these conversations matter. The question of meat and cleanliness, the questions of sexuality and what we do with our bodies, it matters, and it's not as important as loving one another.
Yeah.
And so I think we continually are brought back to that place, and I think like that's where I tried to be when I was in a more traditionalist community inside, and that's where I hope to be, you know, where I am now and where I continue to be as I continue my process of becoming.
I love it. You're so right. You're so right. Like, it's almost as though Jesus, I wish somebody would have just asked him. I wish somebody just would have asked him, what's the most important thing? Because then he could have made it so clear. He could have just been like, and I'm just putting words in his mouth, so I don't know what he would have said, but he could have said, you know what the most important thing is? Love. Love God. Hell, love your neighbor. You might even want to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. So you kind of got to love yourself too. Oh, and by the way, can you love your enemies too? Like as much. I just wish somebody would have asked Jesus so we could have settled once and for all what the most important thing was. But we'll just have to guess in the meantime and use conjecture because we're just out here. Who knows?
Just
Julie,
winging it.
You're just winging it. The book is Outlove, a queer Christian survival story. And it is, in my opinion, the best of its kind because you were deeper into the evangelical ex-gay world than most people, and you came blasting out of it farther and more glorious than most people. And so if anyone is going to have credibility in all the worlds of this and all the different aspects of it, it's you. And I'm honored to learn from you. I'm inspired by you. Like I said at the top, I'm super proud of you for writing this, and I really want everybody who watches this now and later to frickin' buy and read this book and tell your friends about it. It's really good.
Thank you so much. And review it if you do.
Yeah, that too. By the way, from one author to another author, like leave reviews for people's books. It just helps a lot. It really does. And I know people hear us say that all the time, and it goes in one ear and out the other, and I get that. But every once in a while, you get someone who's like, "Oh, actually, I have an extra 5 minutes. I'll go and
one sentence.
I'll go and hit that sentence, hit that star."
This is great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. It's been so great chatting, Colby.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.
All right. So that's J. Rodge. I didn't ask her if I could call her that. I just asked her if I could call her Jewels, and she said yes to that. And now I'm going to J. Rodge. Shoot, I'll have to ask her if I can call her J. Rodge. Man, yeah, I agree, Susan. That was so great. Thank you so much. I agree, Brooke. Thank you, Julie. Mercy. Thank you, Julie Rodgers. It's a really fantastic book. I feel like I'm not going to lead you astray by insisting. In fact, like I said at the top, there's so many things that I want to say in that book. I think I'm going to talk to Kate about getting Julie on the Kate and Colby show later. It's got to be a couple months from now because we are booked with so many good guests. Did I tell you that we're going to tell you the guest tomorrow? We're going to tell you the guest tomorrow. All right, that's it for me. Just one more reminder to check out Julie's book, Outlove. There's a link in the description. Check out the latest garage session episode of the Kate and Colby show. And if you want to head over to UnClobber.com, you can check out the new UnClobber online courses. Last day to use the promo code PRIDE21 to save 21%, and also learn about my new partners there that I'm going to be supporting with all of your purchases. Every time you buy, they get supported. All right, that's it, everyone. It's been really fun to do these conversations, hasn't it? It's been really fun. I have been just delighted by each guest, Ashton and Justin and Yeamah and Julie. I think I'm going to find a way to keep doing more of these types of conversations on this Wednesday show, which, if all goes well, next week should be the unveiling of the new name, and we'll put to rest. We'll say thank you to Perspective Shift as being the name for this show for the last few months. It'll continue to be the name of the newsletter. But then this show will be called something entirely different, and we'll have maybe some different elements to it, different aspects to it. But I'm still going to be here. I ain't going nowhere. Wednesdays, 2 p.m. Pacific. I'll be here. All right. Thanks, everyone. Be well. I love you. Have good weeks. Thanks for watching this week's episode of Perspective Shift. I'm going to now invite you to do one of three things, or do them all if you're an overachiever. First, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to my free Perspective Shift newsletter. You can do that by going to colbymartin.substack.com. This will ensure that each week the articles that I write arrive safely in your inbox. Second, if you're watching this on YouTube, just go ahead and hit subscribe on my channel. That'd be awesome. Or if you're watching this on Facebook, would you click like on my page? For me, this is a win-win, in that it helps me know that you're out there and that you care. Plus, it helps you know when I'm going live. For all my other work, including books that I've written or sermons that I've preached, head on over to colbymartinonline.com. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me live next week.